Welcome to our podcast for college Catholics, where we discuss faith and spirituality from a Catholic perspective. I'm Father Patrick, and today we will have a guest, Father Michael Ward. Father Michael Ward is an Englishman, a Catholic priest, and a literary critic and theologian, with a special expertise on the writings of C.S. Lewis. He works at the University of Oxford, where he is an associate member of the Faculty of Theology and Religion. He is the author of the award-winning and best-selling book, Planet Narnia, The Seven Heavens, in the Imagination of C.S. Lewis, and After Humanity, a guide to C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man. And we are also recording this podcast on the road in a makeshift studio here at the Grotto at Hillsdale College. So I'm happy to have you, Father Ward. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Father Patrick. Good to be back.
Yes, great to have you here, and thank you for honoring us with your presence. How have you been doing? Is there anything that has happened in your daily life recently that is of interest?
Well,
you're in the U.S. You travel from England, from Oxford to
that's
England.
right. Yeah, I come here every semester to give a short course at Hillsdale College.
That's awesome.
Well, since I think I was last on the podcast, I've published another book, but not an especially academic book. It's more of a fun book about film, about cinema. I wrote it with two friends, and we went through the Vatican film list.
Nice.
The list of 45 films that was put together in the under the pontificate of John Paul II in 1995, I think it was, to celebrate the centenary of cinema.
Okay.
And there are 45 films on this list, and my two co-authors and I divided the list between us and gave a review of each of these 45 titles.
That's a lot.
Yeah. There are a lot of well-known movies like Ben-Hur, Babette's Feast, Manful's Seasons, Citizen Kane, Chariots of Fire, Schindler's List. And we gave a quick review from a kind of theological perspective.
From a Catholic point of view.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah, and it was published by the Catholic Press, Word on Fire.
Nice.
And it's well illustrated. We've got lots of questions and sort of interesting tidbits about each movie. It's designed for film groups and, maybe youth groups in churches that want to look at interesting movies from a Christian point of view. So that was good fun.
Wonderful. Well, I had an event happen to me today. I drive an hour and a half, almost an hour 40 minutes to come to Hillsdale to say Mass and meet with the students today for spiritual direction, and it goes from about 10:30 to 5 p.m. So in the morning, I drive, and then I drive back in the evening. And on my way here, I pass through many rural roads. And I was driving, and I saw a deer. And say, that is always a problem, right? Because you don't know when they're going to jump in front of you. So I slow down, I put my hazard lights on, my blinkers, and I slow down, and then he crosses, the first deer crosses, and then I see a second deer, and it crosses as well, and then a third deer, and it crosses as well. Right. And I'm thinking, okay, how many are there, So I slow down, but I don't get to a full stop because there's a truck behind me, and it's getting closer, and I see it bigger in my rearview mirror. So then finally, it seems that they're gone. They're over. That's all the three are gone, and that's it. And then I start to normalize my pace, my speed, and then a fourth deer comes into the view here in front of me, and he's like just showing his head, And then I try to slow down, and then it runs right across me. And I almost hit it. I hit it. I put my brakes on, but I hit it in the I brushed it. I heard a brush, and nothing happened to the deer. And then I checked my car, and everything was all well. Oof. Everything was fine, not even a scratch or anything. But I did hit it gently. So I was like with the adrenaline rush the rest of the road. I almost hit a deer. And sometimes you can total your car, or it could be a grave accident.
Whoa, so very serious.
Yeah. Luckily, nothing happened, and I didn't kill a deer. And about killing deer, we come to the topic of today, where we will be talking about the fifth commandment, and particularly the just war theory in C.S. Lewis. So I wanted to first of all, summarize the principles that we find in the Catechism of the Catholic Church about the just war theory. So in number 2309, 2309, we read the following. The gravity of such a decision because the idea is we're not completely pacifists, right? There is a sovereignty and there's a common good that needs to be defended in certain occasions. So under a certain duress, right, the rightful authority can take the decision to go to war. But there have to be some, the church says there has to be some conditions for that war. So the gravity, says the Catechism, of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. At one and the same time, first of all, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. That is, the attacker has to be a real attacker, and there has to be damage being done before one defends itself. A second thing is that all the other means of putting an end to that aggression must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. There must be a serious prospect of success in that defense, right, and not go to war knowing that we're going to lose because all the damage that can be caused. And the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. So these are the traditional elements enumerated in what is called the just war theory, says the Catechism, or just war doctrine. And the evaluation of these conditions of moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have the responsibility for the common good, that is, in the government, right? So, Father, again, thank you for being with us, and we're going to talk about all these things a bit more at length. But first of all, why don't you tell us what are the writings or books, or some of the books in which Lewis speaks about the just war?
Yeah, he writes about it he writes about war in quite a few places. I've identified 6 articles or essays where war is a main topic. 3 of them are rather minor, they're not terribly important, but I'll list them just for completeness' sake. And they are called Private Bates, The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment, and Blimpophobia.
That's all one title?
No, those are 3 titles.
Okay.
Then there are another 3, which I will both name and talk about a bit. One is an essay called Talking About Bicycles.
Wow.
Where he talks about attitudes to war under 4 headings. The average person doesn't think much about war. They just see that it's violent and wasteful, and they don't give it any thought at all. They're totally disenchanted with it. Unenchanted with it, I should say. Then comes the enchanted stage, when you think, war can achieve a lot. It's a glorious undertaking, and it's chivalric and noble. And people in that category, Lewis says, are people like Macaulay with his Lays of Ancient Rome, and maybe G.K. Chesterton with his poem Lepanto, and Rupert Brooke, the English poet who wrote a famous poem called The Soldier. They're enchanted with war.
Right.
They see what it can achieve. Their minds are full of last stands and glorious charges and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then there comes the disenchanted stage. Someone like Siegfried Sassoon. Lewis gives him as an example of a man who did fight in the First World War and bravely and won the Military Cross, but then became very disenchanted with the whole purpose of that conflict and wrote against it very virulently and wrote lots of anti-war poems.
Mm-hmm.
He only saw how cruel it was and how pointless. And then there's a 4th stage, which Lewis means, I think, to include himself among, the re-enchanted, where you do not deny in any sense how awful and cruel and violent and horrific war can be.
Right.
But nonetheless, you see that there can be such a thing as just war. There can be a valid conflict, and heroism is a real thing.
Right. And sometimes it's necessary.
Absolutely. So in that fourth category, Lewis includes not only himself, but Homer. A lot of the writings of Homer, he thinks, fall into that category.
Mm-hmm.
There's an anonymous medieval poem called The Battle of Malden, which is also very heroic in this very realistic sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fantastical. It's not
Idealistic.
Idealistic in that bad sense of the word. And I think Lewis, as I say, means to include himself in that fourth group, the re-enchanted.
Okay.
So anyway, that's talking about bicycles. Then there's two other pieces. One is called The Necessity of Chivalry, which Lewis wrote during the Second World War. And he's talking there about how the knight, the medieval ideal of the knight, the chivalric, gallant knight, is a work of art. It's not a work of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And a true knight has to be extremely tough and strong and willing to endure a lot of, and even inflict a lot of pain.
Right.
But the knight is a modest man, a self-controlled man, who can converse in hall among ladies, but also can wield iron weapons and deal in blood and terror.
Right.
It's combining the two things. He's meek to the nth degree, but he is fierce to the nth degree.
Mm-hmm.
And combining those two qualities is what the medieval ideal of knighthood gave us. And it's an important ideal, Lewis says, and it needs to be reimagined in every generation. And he says that he's writing in 1940.
Mm-hmm.
He's writing during the Battle of Britain, when the German Luftwaffe is bombing England and
destroying
preparing
everything.
an invasion. And Lewis is talking about the men of the Royal Air Force, the pilots who are fighting the Battle of Britain. And he says, from all accounts he hears, these modern pilots are chivalric in that sense.
Absolutely.
They're heroically doing their deeds of daring do and blasting the enemy out of the sky.
Right.
And some of them are being blown up themselves and captured and tortured and put through prisoners of war camps and, going through hell.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also knightly. They're self-controlled. They're decent. They're honourable. They're patriotic in the best sense of the word. And so that's the chivalric ideal, which he says is needful
Mm-hmm.
in every generation. Because he says without it, the world is exposed to the wolves who do not understand and the sheep who cannot defend all that makes life valuable.
Right.
So that's a very important little short article he wrote. And then the third of these second three that I'm mentioning is a talk that Lewis gave under the title "Why I Am Not a Pacifist."
Mm-hmm.
And he delivered that talk, again, during the Second World War to the Oxford Pacifist Society.
Wow.
They invited him to come and present his arguments as to why he disagreed with them. And it's quite a long and detailed description of why he thought there was such a thing as just war. So this is the main thing
Right.
to look at. And he's talking about how we come to moral decisions, the workings of the conscience, the workings of reason, how it works on facts and intuitions and responds to authority, both human and divine, how it deals with the passions, how there might be warping passions that either lead us unduly into war, passions of aggression and hatred,
Right.
but also how there can be warping passions on the other side of timidity and self-preservation and even cowardice,
Right.
which prevent us from stepping up and doing the hard but necessary task. So that's a very bracing and very tightly argued piece of moral reasoning, which anybody who's got an interest in this subject really should look at some point.
Very good. Well, and so all that is really powerful to be able to. So I'll try to put all the links to all those things in the show notes.
By the way, let me also just mention one other thing.
Yes.
That's a letter that he wrote to a friend who was in fact a Benedictine monk, Dom Bede Griffiths, He wrote it on the 5th of October 1938. So if you've got access to his complete letters, they're published in 3 volumes, you can look up this letter where Lewis talks about the various reasons that he thinks are pertinent in defense of just war. And I'll just quickly rattle through them. He gives 4 main reasons. One is that Jesus himself, in the Gospels, he doesn't appear to regard the Roman soldiers as ex officio sinners.
Right.
They're not sinful because they're soldiers. That's just one little brief point. He doesn't elaborate, but he makes a rather similar point with regard to John the Baptist.
Right, and he cures the
Roman centurions.
The centurion,
yeah, exactly,
right.
Yes.
So he doesn't say you're wrong because you're a centurion. He said no, you're a centurion, and you're official, and you're a respectable person.
Exactly. Yes, he doesn't treat them like tax collectors and prostitutes.
Right.
And John the Baptist, similarly, he talks to the soldiers and says, be content with your wages. Do not extort. Right. He doesn't tell them to leave the army.
Absolutely.
A third reason is Lewis points to the writings of St. Augustine of Hippo in the City of God and other places where Augustine says that war is justified because it's aimed at peace.
Right.
It's an unpleasant task that you have to go through, but it's justified if it results in the desired peace when nothing else can achieve it. It's like going through painful surgery.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to go under the knife, but if that's the only way of cutting out the cancer, of course you go through with it. And then finally, he talks about how so much of the Christian tradition, generally speaking, is not pacifistic, and those sects of Christianity which are pacifist, like I think he means the Quakers, they tend also to hold rather questionable doctrines in other areas. So he doesn't really trust that they belong to the mainstream Christian tradition.
Wonderful. Now, so Lewis lived through both wars, world wars, the First World War and the Second World War. Why don't you tell us a little bit what he did during those 2 conflicts and what his personal experience of war was?
Well, exactly. He lived through 2 world wars, and he didn't live to be quite 65. So if you add up all the years when the world was at war, 4 years in the Great War, and then nearly 6 years in the Second War, so roughly 10 years of Lewis's life, the world was at war, and he only lived to 65, a week short of his 65th birthday he was when he died. So, more than 1 day in every 7, on average, during his life, the world was at war.
That's a lot.
Because he was born in 1898 and he died in 1963.
And both were like world wars.
Yes.
And very, very cruel, the first one, and very cruel in different ways, the second one.
Absolutely. And he fought in the First World War. He didn't have to fight because he was an Irishman. And the Irish were not conscripted. So he volunteered to serve in the First World War. And he was given a commission as a second lieutenant, or second lieutenant, as you Americans say. We say lieutenant for some reason in English.
Okay.
And he entered into an infantry regiment. He did about 6 months training and then went to France and entered the trenches on his 19th birthday.
Wow.
And he saw active service for about 6 months, although some of that 6 months he was ill with trench fever and he was hospitalized. But he recovered from his trench fever in time to see the huge German offensive in the spring of 1918. And it was during that he was blown up. He was very nearly killed. His sergeant was just annihilated next to him. And Lewis was spattered full of shrapnel when a shell fell in his trench. And he had a kind of out-of-body experience. The picture arose in his mind, here is a man dying, he thought, when he thought he was not breathing.
Wow.
But obviously he survived by a hair's breadth. And some of the shrapnel in his body was never extracted. The doctor said, well, you can carry that around, it won't do any harm. And he spent about 6 months recovering from his war wounds. And then by the time he was recovered, the war was basically over in November of 1918. So that was his experience in the Great War. And he writes about it briefly in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy. He talks about how exhaustion and cold were as much an enemy as the Germans were, and water, the waterlogged trenches, and how you sometimes stepped on a piece of submerged barbed wire and it punctured your boot, and you felt the icy water filling up your boot. So the conditions were horrific. Quite aside from the bombardment that you were undergoing, you just had to live in these ratish hellholes. So he went through it, and he talks about how he remembers that the sitting and standing dead, the recent corpses, were just propped up against barbed wire and trees and things.
That's terrible.
He saw absolutely awful things, but he said that in fact he managed with almost complete success to seal that part of his memory and box it off so that it didn't blight the whole of his rest of his life. He said occasionally it figured in his dreams. He would have a recurrent nightmare.
Of course.
But although he was, in many respects traumatized, he wasn't broken entirely by it. He was able to bear up under it and reestablish some kind of sanity and psychological health. And it must be added that he wasn't at this time of his life calling himself a Christian. Someone once said to him, did you ever pray when you were in the trenches? Oh, sorry, were you ever frightened in the trenches? And he said, yeah, I was frightened all the time, but I never sank so low as to pray.
Wow.
Because that was his attitude. He was an atheist. Right. There was nobody to pray to, in his view. And he wrote a book of poems in 1919 in which a lot of his war experience features. And he's talking a lot about the bleakness and the darkness and the satanic nature of the world as he saw it in those days. And yet all the time his own sort of more romantic and idealistic and spiritual side was struggling to get out. And so this book of poetry called Spirits in Bondage is really a tussle between these two impulses in him. Mm-hmm. So that's rough, in summary, what happened to him in the First World War. In the Second World War, he was in a reserved occupation, so he wasn't, and he was almost too old to be called up in any case. He was in his early 40s when the Second World War broke out, right. And he wasn't terribly strong or healthy, so he was never going to be called up. But he tried to do his bit for the war effort in Britain by two things. He joined what they called the Home Guard, the local defence volunteers. And they were little bands of men who kept an eye out for spies and the long promised invasion. There was a lot of threat of invasion, especially in 1940, and with German bombers racing overhead every night, blitzing London and Bristol and Portsmouth and other major cities. Who knew when a German airman might have to bail out and land, and so the Home Guard was on the lookout for German parachutists,
right?
Who might land and try to cause trouble,
right? Because the difference there in the First World War, it was all in Europe, mainland Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
Now the war was at home.
That's right.
It had reached England itself.
Yeah, and Lewis lived in Oxford, and Oxford wasn't bombed. People said that was because Hitler wanted to preserve it as his capital if he should have invaded. Because, London was getting blitzed terribly. But Oxford wasn't hit even once, I believe, or maybe there was one stray accidental bombing. So Lewis didn't have to face the Blitz himself in Oxford, but he knew all about it and read about it. And there was one terrible occasion, Tolkien writes about this, when Coventry, the city of Coventry, just to the north of Oxford, was bombed terribly. It was really razed to the ground.
Wow.
And Coventry is, I don't know how many miles, maybe 40, 50 miles north of Oxford, but the fires were so huge and tall and bright that Tolkien, going to bed late that night, saw an orange glow on the distant horizon, and that was Coventry burning many miles away.
Wow.
So that was one thing Lewis did. He joined the Home Guard.
Mm-hmm.
He took his old rifle and mooched about the most malodorous parts of Oxford looking for German parachutists one night in 7. But more seriously, he went around giving talks to the men of the Royal Air Force.
Right.
He went to various RAF stations and gave talks about, largely about the faith, the Christian faith. And so it's mostly Christian groupings that came to him. He went at the request of the Royal Air Force chaplains. And he was very sober and realistic. He wasn't there just to give them a pep talk. He was there to get them to think seriously about life and death. And when one of these RAF chaplains spoke rather lightly about the Christian's hope in the face of death, Lewis said, well, true, we have hope, but death is still a serious thing and a terrible thing, and we are right to fear it. And so we mustn't be sentimental about it. We must prepare for it realistically. And, that attitude came from his own experience in the First World War. And this chaplain recognized it and said that the men appreciated the seriousness with which he talked, that they could tell that his thoughts had been forged in a furnace,
right,
rather than stored in a glacier. He spoke with genuine moral authority because of what he himself had been through.
Mm-hmm.
So he did a lot of that, talking to the RAF, but he obviously didn't fight.
Right, so he was like a ministry of encouragement, so to speak.
Yes.
And to understand not the goodness of war, but the need of why some have to sacrifice for the common good.
Yes, and how, if war is necessary, then it can be done, can be enacted better or worse. So you can, as it were, do good within war if you fight with the right spirit and with the right attitude and with the right aims and with the right limits upon you.
Right. Yeah. Honorably, let's say.
Yeah.
Very good. So thank you for all that. So now Lewis was greatly interested in the imagery of the 7 heavens, the planets of medieval cosmology. And the planet Mars is, of course, associated with war. So what use did Lewis make of the martial imagery in his writings? And this also has to do with the book he wrote, The Planet Narnia, so of course.
Yes, he was interested in all 7 of the 7 heavens. We don't have time to talk about the other 6, but Mars, the god of war, he writes about in a number of places. In a long poem that he wrote about the planets, he gives a long description of the martial qualities. The metal of Mars is iron, and he says that the martial iron was hammered through hands into holy cross, cruel carpentry. So there he's talking about the crucifixion of Christ in martial imagery, that Jesus himself is a kind of martial hero, a martial knight who tackles Satan and the forces of darkness by embracing his cross.
Right, and also the Catholic imagery of the spiritual life, like a spiritual combat.
Yes.
It's not out of nowhere that also Christ calls himself a king.
Yes. Yeah, and the Apostle Paul talks about putting on the armor of God, the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. Fight the good fight. Be a good soldier of Christ Jesus.
Of Christ. Yeah, absolutely.
So the spiritual life can very often be depicted in martial terms, even within the Bible.
Absolutely.
And in the Old Testament too. Think of the Lord of hosts, mighty in battle.
Right.
Anyway, that's the planet's poem. Lewis also wrote a novel called Out of the Silent Planet, which is set on Mars. And there he takes his hero to Mars and gets him to experience, obviously in a very imaginative setting, the martial spirit, the masculine spirit, the tonic heroic, rhythmic, patterned, disciplined, dutiful spirit. All these qualities he tries to infuse the novel with. And then in his Narnia book, Prince Caspian, which I believe is also written according to the spirit of Mars, but this time implicitly. It's woven into the warp and the woof of the story. It's not made explicit. There in Prince Caspian, he again tries to present the chivalric ideal. So there's the character of Peter, who is obviously the model knight. He's tough. He's a swordsman. He goes into single combat with his enemy, but he's also concerned with small points of etiquette and propriety, and he's exactly like that knight that Lewis describes in The Necessity of Chivalry. Lewis dramatizes that essay in this Narnia Chronicle, but he depicts both the excessively martial and the insufficiently martial as well in that story. So there are these characters called the hag and the werewolf in the story, who are prepared to do anything in order to further their war aims.
Exactly.
They'll reach out for any weapon, however cruel and unnecessary. They'll even go to the demonic. They think they're going to call up the White Witch from a previous story to aid them in their war aims, and that's obviously excessive. That's not. You've read the relevant bit from the Catechism. That's not an ordinate response.
Right.
So they're excessively martial. But then there are these other characters called the Telmarines, who are insufficiently martial. They're rather dandified. They're emasculated. They're cowardly, basically, and they're ill-disciplined, and they turn on their own men. They stab each other in the back, literally, because they have no martial discipline. They have no sense of honor and dignity. So in Prince Caspian, you have the ideal in Caspian himself, the title character, and Peter, and the various the good Narnians, the true
the
knights.
queens and the princesses. The
Yeah,
girls too.
yeah. Well, quite. And Lucy,
Right.
Though she doesn't fight in the army, she has to show her own martial strength, her own martial hardness. Hard, that word is a key term for Lewis. Whenever he's talking about Mars, he talks about the hard virtue of Mars. You have to toughen up yourself to do the hard but necessary task. And Lucy has to do a hard thing. It's not in the front lines of the battle, but she has to waken her older siblings and tell them in the middle of the night that they've been going in the wrong direction and that they need to follow her. She's following Aslan, the Christ character. And it's a terrible thing to have to wake 4 people all older than yourself and all very tired in the middle of the night and tell them to change their direction.
Right.
I mustn't think about it. I must just do it, Lucy says to herself. And that's exactly the martial spirit, the disciplined, self-controlled, hardened moral fibre that is necessary for the just war. So the planets, Out of the Silent Planet and Prince Caspian, are the sort of creative outlets where Lewis talks about the martial spirit. A friend of his said that when she read his treatment of Mars, she was put in mind of Holst. Gustav Holst. He wrote The Planet's Suite. And Lewis said, "Oh yes, I have liked The Planet's Suite too. It's a rich and marvelous work that I have enjoyed greatly. And wasn't his Mars brutal and ferocious? The way Holst imagines Mars musically. You don't know The Planet's Suite. You may still know Star Wars, the film. And John Williams, his soundtrack for Star Wars is a rip-off of Holst.
Ah, there you go.
And anyway, Lewis said that Holst's treatment of Mars was brutal and ferocious and the finest piece of anti-war propaganda that I have struck.
Wow.
So there are musical ways of imagining this as well as literary ways. Yeah.
Of course. Very good. Yes, and I noticed in the Chronicles of Narnia, I read them all, and even in the last battle, it was surprising how, because you think you think that, or you would imagine, of course, there's more than children's stories, but there are also children's stories.
Yeah.
But they speak about killing and the sword fighting and blood gushing.
Yes.
So there's obviously a place for that too, that is acceptable. Especially defending honor, defending what is good, defending Narnia, and so forth.
Absolutely.
So there you see, even without being too aware of the theory of it, you see that these are fighting for something that is necessary, that is good to defend.
Yes.
That if we don't defend it, they will take over and they will destroy us all. And
Yes.
Narnia is going to be gone, and so forth.
Yes.
So what other thoughts would you want to wrap up this episode with about Just War and C.S. Lewis?
Well, I'm not sure that I have much more to say, to be honest, except that, he and Tolkien, his great friend, had fought in the First World War as Tolkien as a Christian, Lewis as a non-Christian, but they both thought that it was justified. They saw terrible things. They're not under any illusions about how awful war can be, yet they were not deflected from their belief that sometimes it's necessary, and when it's necessary, it must be conducted within certain limits, like the Catechism says. And people need to be bred up, especially men, because it's nearly always men who fight in wars, to be honourable. So that when under pressure of war, you might be tempted, like the hag and the werewolf, to reach for something improper. You are restrained from that. You don't go to the maximum level of cruelty. You do the bare minimum to achieve your war aims. And so Lewis will say, as he does in Mere Christianity, he says that the idea of the knight in arms in defense of a good cause is one of the great ideas of Christianity. But that's the important thing, the knight in arms in defense of a good cause. It's not just because I want to fight that I'm fighting.
Absolutely
It's
not.
that I have to fight.
Right.
I'm being forced to fight, almost against my will.
Right.
But because you, the enemy, are forcing me, well, I am ready.
Of course.
I have prepared. I know how to do this, and I will do it. And I will stop you committing your evil. And for your own good, I might have to kill you.
Right.
Because you are doing something terribly evil to me and to my nation. But I don't want to overcome you. I don't want to conquer you. I don't want to invade your country. I want to release you from this tornado of cruelty that you have got yourself into.
Absolutely.
So Tolkien, we mustn't start talking about Tolkien and war, but there is that marvelous line in The Lord of the Rings where Faramir, the captain of Gondor, says, I do not love the sword for its sharpness or the arrow for its swiftness, but I love that which they defend.
Absolutely.
I do not kill man or beast needlessly, and I do not kill them gladly, even at need.
Right.
That's exactly the attitude that should be sponsored by men of all men of goodwill, whether they're Christians or not, but especially within the Christian tradition, where we have not only the ideal of the knight, but the ideal of the martyr, who is willing to die if necessary in defense of a good cause. Knighthood, Lewis says in one place, is a schoolmaster to the ideal of martyrdom. Martyrdom is, in a sense, the martial spirit at its height. You don't want to throw your life away needlessly, and being a true knight is not being a suicide.
Absolutely.
But you're only an effective warrior if you are in principle willing to give up your life.
Right.
And so, that's something that Christians looking to our Lord Jesus can live into in a way more effectively. That's one of our resources that non-Christians would not have in the same way. So those are some further thoughts.
Yeah, when you were talking about the Christian that is prepared to war but doesn't love war, would rather not have it first. I remembered about Joan of Arc, right? How she had to, I think it was before the siege of Orleans or before one of those smaller battles that she had Lord Warwick in front of her, if I said it right. And she sent him a letter, first commanding them to leave, or to not go to war, not go to battle, but to join her in a crusade to go to the Holy Land and defend the holy places. And that instead of fighting each other, we should fight together against a common enemy.
Yeah.
But if they are not willing to go, and before this amount of time, they're going to go to battle, and she will defeat them. So she was ready to do it.
The readiness is all.
Right. And she was ready to die, and she did die, not in battle proper, but because of the battle.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you very much, Father, for being with us today, for sharing your wisdom about Lewis and all these amazing writings that he wrote. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is all for today. Thank you for listening, and please share this episode with your friends. Hope to see you next time, and may God bless your day.